Ever looked up at the moon and thought how peaceful it looks at night? Maybe you've sat outside during a power outage, phone in hand, only to glance up and feel calm seeing that glowing ball in the sky. It's always there, just quietly watching over the Earth. But what if that peaceful ball of light had once been the target of a nuclear explosion by no other than NASA? What could make NASA, an agency known for space exploration and scientific discovery, plan to blow up the moon? And why isn't this story told in science books or documentaries today? Let's pull back the curtain on one of the most secret and bold plans NASA ever created. Because yes, it was authentic. So what exactly was Project A119? Back in the 1950s, the world wasn't just busy with rock and roll, new cars, and TV sets, but also living with Cold War fears. Behind closed doors, governments were locked in one of the most intense Cold War rivalries. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were both in a mad rush, not just to control land on Earth, but also to dominate the skies and space beyond it. And after the Soviets launched Sputnik, the first ever satellite, in 1957, it hit a nerve in the US. They didn't just fall behind. They were embarrassed, and fear spread like wildfire across the nation. The US needed to make a statement, bold, unforgettable, and loud. That's when a classified project known as Project A119 came into existence. It wasn't the work of science fiction writers or comic book dreamers, but it was a real military plan, and it was backed by some of the most brilliant minds of the time, working behind locked doors. The idea was straightforward, but shocking. The US would detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon to show off its power and send a message to the world, especially the Soviet Union. The people working on Project A119 weren't just military officials. Scientists, physicists, and engineers were pulled into the mission. One of them was a young Carl Sagan, who later became one of the most famous science communicators in history. At the time, though, he was just another bright mind working behind closed doors, helping figure out what would happen if a nuclear explosion went off in space. These weren't open meetings or public discussions. Everything happened behind locked doors, with top-secret documents and hushed, coded conversations. Even some of the scientists weren't fully told the end goal at first. They just ran simulations, unaware they were helping plan a potential lunar explosion. There was tension in the labs, a strange mix of excitement and unease, as if everyone involved knew they were part of something too big to fully understand. Now here's where it got serious. The explosion wasn't meant to destroy the moon. The plan wasn't some Hollywood-style blast that would send chunks of moon rock flying into Earth's orbit. It was meant to be visible from Earth. A flash, a glow, a sign that would show the world, look what we can do. And it wasn't supposed to be random. The timing, location, and impact all needed to be calculated perfectly to make sure the explosion would be visible to people watching from Earth. The military called it a display of force. But the truth was, it was part science, part fear, and all politics. But why a nuke and not just a rover or a flag? The idea was that if they could set off a nuke on the moon and have it show up as a flash in the night sky, people all over the planet would see it. Newspapers would print it, kids would talk about it at school, countries would take notice. It was less about hurting anyone and more about showing what America was capable of doing, with space, science, and nuclear power. But how could they even pull that off? Sending a nuke to the moon wasn't exactly like sending a letter in the mail. The rocket had to be powerful enough to escape Earth's gravity, reach the moon, and deliver a warhead that would explode at the right time. Plus, there were tons of unknowns. What kind of crater would it make? Would the explosion spread radioactive material into space? Could it affect Earth's atmosphere somehow? Even worse, the scientists knew that there would be no atmosphere on the moon to contain the explosion. That meant the iconic mushroom cloud we usually associate with nuclear blasts wouldn't even appear. Instead, it would just be a brief flash of light, maybe a spray of moon dust. It wouldn't look as dramatic as people might expect, and that started to raise doubts. The more scientists looked into it, the more problems they found. For starters, the public might not react the way the military hoped. What if people were scared instead of impressed? What if the blast damaged future missions to the moon or contaminated the surface with radiation? The scientific community was starting to push back. There were ethical concerns, environmental worries, and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this whole thing was a terrible idea. So what stopped this audacious plan? The biggest problem was trust. NASA was just starting to grow as a space agency, trying to bring people together through exploration, not war. If word got out that they were working on plans to nuke the moon, public opinion might collapse. The moon had been a symbol of mystery and beauty for centuries. People had written poems about it, prayed to it, and proposed under it. Nuking it, even for show, felt wrong to a lot of people, even if it was only on paper. And then came the math. The military wanted to use a W-25 nuclear warhead, small compared to modern ones, but still powerful. Scientists estimated that the explosion would be equivalent to about 1.7 kilotons of TNT. That's less than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, but still enough to cause visible damage. The plan was to detonate it just above the surface of the moon to maximize visibility from Earth. But without air, there would be no shockwave, no sound, and not much debris, just light. So after all that work, all that planning, and all that secrecy, what happened? The project was quietly canceled. And what was the reason for this cancellation? The official reason: a combination of scientific concern and fear of public backlash. The military decided that the risks outweigh the benefits. They didn't want to be known as the nation that blew up the moon. They also didn't want to trigger a new arms race in space. The Soviets might respond with their display. What if both countries started firing nuclear weapons into space, turning the moon into a test ground? That could have sparked something far worse. So Project A119 was buried, literally. The documents were kept secret for decades. Most Americans had no idea their country had once planned to nuke the moon. It wasn't until the late 1990s that the story finally came to light. Historians and journalists dug into the archives and uncovered the plan. It's strange to think how different things could have turned out. But what if they had gone through with it? Would the moon still carry a scar from that explosion? Would future astronauts have had to deal with radioactive dust? Would people still look at the moon the same way at night? Thankfully, the decision to cancel Project A119 may have been one of the smartest moves the government made during that time. Instead of sending a nuke to the moon, NASA focused on peaceful exploration. Just a decade later, humans walked on the moon during the Apollo 11 mission in 1969. That moment inspired the world. It united people, and it showed what space exploration could mean. Not power, but progress. So why did NASA's plan to nuke the moon stay hidden for so long? Probably because it didn't fit the image they wanted to show. NASA has always tried to represent peace, progress, and discovery. Blowing up celestial bodies didn't exactly match that mission. Also, if the public had known during the Cold War, it could have caused panic or made other countries feel threatened. There's also something deeper at play. The story reminds us how close we came to using space not as a frontier for science, but as a battlefield. Just one bold decision could have changed the course of history. Instead of flags and footprints, the moon could have been marked by a nuclear scar, a reminder of fear-driven decisions. Carl Sagan's early involvement also became public, linking one of the world's most respected scientists to a plan that sounded more like a movie plot than real life. By the time the papers were made available, most people had moved away from the issue. The Cold War ended. Space exploration started to be more about joining forces, including the International Space Station, than competing. Yet the history of Project A119 continues to surface, quietly pointing to how far governments were prepared to go during the space race. And that's the biggest hidden truth you can think of. It wasn't really about science. It wasn't about the moon. It was about fear. Fear of losing. Fear of looking weak. Fear of falling behind. Because of their fear, people almost made a decision that could have affected the moon for good. While the plan was never executed, it still tells us a great deal. It illustrates how, under pressure, intelligent people may also act on impulse. It demonstrates that politics can affect the field of science. It proves that being open about space programs is very important. In the end, the moon stayed untouched. No mushroom clouds, no radioactive soil, just craters from meteors, not missiles. And maybe that's for the best, because some things, like the moon, should be left alone. The real lesson behind NASA's plan to nuke the moon isn't about rockets or bombs. It's about how close we came to turning the sky into a war zone. It's about restraint, about stepping back when things go too far. And that's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just a secret from the past, it's a warning for the future. And every time we look up at the moon now, it shines the same way it always has. Peaceful, quiet, untouched. But now, we know the truth. It could have been very different, and maybe the greatest achievement of all was choosing not to press the button.